Chance Dorland, and this is In-Depth, an interview program from expressnews.com where you can find in-depth reporting and other resources concerning every topic you'll hear discussed on the podcast. Brought to you by the San Antonio Express News. Having opened several new specialized schools to students all over Bexar County, this year the San Antonio Independent School District was supposed to stabilize its declining enrollment and maybe even grow a little. But, as I'm joined now by the author of a story currently available at expressnews.com titled, Largest Ever Enrollment Decline Driving SAISD Budget Shortfall, things obviously did not go according to that plan. San Antonio Express News staff writer Alia Malik has been looking into the problems over at SAISD and joins me now to discuss where the school district finds itself. So, Alia, great to have you here on the program for the first time. Let's start with the very basics for anyone who's not up to date. What is SAISD?
So, SAISD is the large inner city school district in San Antonio. It was kind of the first school district in San Antonio when the boundaries of the city more or less corresponded with the boundaries of SAISD. So I guess you could say it's like San Antonio's original school district. And then as the city grew, we started adding all these other school districts. So SAISD is now the third largest, and its enrollment had pretty much been declining, I don't know for how long, but basically every year in recent memory. And its enrollment was pretty much 53,000 last year, and now it's hovering at about 52,000 and falling.
So obviously that's not what they want at that school district. They want more students, and we'll talk about why that's very important, not only for the thriving school district, but for the money for the school district to be able to keep going. Tell me first about SAISD's plan to open new specialized schools in order to hopefully stabilize, or as I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, maybe even increase its student enrollment.
So the schools that SAISD has been opening under the most recent superintendent were done with the intention of attracting more families to SAISD, but that it wasn't just really about growing the numbers. It was also about improving the school district in general. SAISD is a high poverty school district, and because of issues related to poverty, mostly it's also kind of a lower performing school district in that it has a number of schools that have failed to meet state standards, and the kids in SAISD just need a lot more academic help. So its reputation had been harmed, and for reasons related to that, the enrollment had been declining. So Superintendent Pedro Martinez came on in about 2015 and pretty quickly started. He started with a 5-year turnaround plan, and it includes more than just these schools, but one aspect of it is a lot of in-district charters that have certain focuses that are open first and foremost to students from within the neighborhood and within SAISD, but also to students all over Bexar County. And they thought those schools would be attractive options for families to either stay in SAISD and not look to send their kids elsewhere if they live within SAISD, or if they live in another school district, they could apply to send their kids to those schools. So some examples are Cass Tech High School, the Advanced Learning Academy, the Mark Twain Dual Language Academy, which used to be Mark Twain Middle School. Schools like that, SAISD thought wouldn't, the enrollment of the school district wouldn't mushroom, but it might stop falling, and it might even grow a little, like we said in the story.
So that plan obviously did not work out as it had been intended to. Through your research, and I know you spoke to the superintendent, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, what were you able to find might be the reasons for why this plan didn't come to fruition, at least as of now?
So no one really knows exactly why enrollment dropped as much as it did this year, as they didn't know why it dropped so much so fast. We know that charter schools play a role in declining enrollment because, families pull their kids out of their neighborhood schools and might send them to charter schools instead. But a drop this large couldn't really be explained solely by charter schools, according to the superintendent. There is data that the state collects that tracks students, mostly to, prevent them from inaccurately being labeled as dropouts. But I'm not really sure what that data bears out other than to say that it's not all caused by charter schools. Another reason that the SAISD superintendent thought might be the case, I don't know how much evidence he has for this, is that the San Antonio area is growing, but the growth might all be occurring in other places that aren't SAISD. So one example he gave is up Interstate 35 towards San Marcos, which is actually a couple of counties away from our county. People are moving to that area, if they have jobs here.
And so once again, as this is the largest ever enrollment decline at SAISD, and I mentioned just a little bit earlier about how that is tied into financial situation for the school district. Roughly speaking, what are those current student and also financial numbers that we're talking about that will decide what this district is going to do into the future and what they have to do in order to stay open?
So the way school finance works, at least here in Texas and probably in a lot of other states, is that the state gives you a certain amount of money based on average daily attendance. So, and that's closely linked to enrollment, right? So if you have 52,000 students in the district, your average daily attendance, which means the amount of students attending SAISD schools on an average day, is somewhere like 40,000. And so it's 40,000 and something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's more than 40,000. So based on that, the state allocates school districts money per student. So 40,000 something students times X amount of money equals the amount of school district funding from the state. And certain students that kind of require more resources to educate are actually worth more, which is why it's actually in a lot of cases called weighted average daily attendance. So you'll get a little bit more money per special education student or English language learner. So needless to say, as that average daily attendance number declines, so does SAISD's funding from the state. But it's not declining just in one school. So you can't really just say, well, with the amount of state funding that we're losing, we'll just close this school, because the declines are happening across the board, and the way they occur is basically a few more students missing from every classroom. So it's not... You end up kind of in a budget hole because you can't just eliminate classes or eliminate schools, because you still need to serve the rest of the students that are in those classes. And in SAISD's case, they actually, as part of this 5-year turnaround plan, had passed a 13-cent tax increase 2 years ago that was supposed to fund enriched academic programs and extracurricular options and classroom technology, all the things that the school district doesn't really have because of its high poverty level. And they made that promise to voters that they were going to pay for those things, and they're not going to go back on that promise. So they're losing money while at the same time trying to fund more things for students that a large number of SAISD students don't have outside of the school district because of their income levels. So one of the reasons that we're not really sure how this is going to play out long term is that, as the superintendent said at Monday night's board meeting, we don't know if this is just a problem this year and next year, or if this is how it's going to look every year from now on. If this is the rate of decline SAISD is going to see, for at least several years in a row. In the latter situation, if this is going to keep going, if this is the trend, SAISD is going to find itself in a lot bigger problem than it has this year.
Yeah, because correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm remembering correctly, given this really unfortunate perfect storm that you've just described, I think their 2-year situation is like something like $30 million in the hole.
Yeah, so they already have a shortfall this year because they have fewer students than they budgeted for. And that's kind of counterintuitive. It sounds like if you budget for more students than you should have surplus money. But really you don't, because you've staffed up for all of those students. You've hired a certain amount of teachers and administrators because you think you're going to have X amount of students, almost 53,000 students. When you have less than that, fewer students than that, you kind of have more employees than you need. But SAISD didn't want to eliminate employees in the middle of the school year. They actually they're kind of in a good situation because they have smaller class sizes. And while they would love to preserve those smaller class sizes in a lot of their schools and classes, they can't financially do it. So they're managing through the shortfall this year. They have strong reserve funds, in part due to the TRE and which is the tax stratification election, the tax increase that happened 2 years ago. So that's kind of why, instead of just saying, well, this is the shortfall next year, they talked about the shortfall over 2 years, which is this year and next year, based on their projected decline in enrollment for next year.
I know your story specifically mentions that SAISD superintendent does not want to close any schools for the reasons that you just mentioned. And obviously, they just don't want to close any schools. That's something they don't want to do. So given everything that we've mentioned so far, what's your idea? What have you been able to gauge for what they're trying to do for the future? Obviously, if the numbers aren't there and the money isn't there, maybe there's nothing that they really can do. There's only so much that could be done in a situation like this. But assuming things might get a little bit better, what are some of the things SAISD is planning for to hopefully, navigate the storm into greener pastures, if you will, several years down the road?
Well, the way that they're addressing the way that they want to address the shortfall this year and next year, they've not made final decisions on it yet, but at Monday night's board meeting, they kind of talked about they called it guiding principles, overarching principles that they want to keep in mind as they address this budget problem. One of the things that they mentioned is cuts through attrition. So I talked earlier about how you can't just eliminate certain teachers because it's not like all the enrollment is just missing from certain classes. What you can do is what they call right sizing, which is basically making sure you have the right amount of teachers in every school for the enrollment of that school. And SAISD does have a lot of teacher turnover. A lot of teachers leave for, certain other districts in Bexar County every year, usually Northside and Northeast, which are bigger and have a little more resources. SAISD tends to hire 500 new teachers by the start of every school year. So the Associate Superintendent of Human Resources basically made the point Monday that, they could just hire fewer teachers because they won't need so many. And then so it cuts through attrition. And then they could move some teachers from one school to another school based on the way the enrollment declines play out in every school. If one school has a much bigger decline, that teacher can be reassigned to another school in the district where he or she might be needed. The problem with that is that we don't really know how many teachers are going to quit until after the budget is passed, because most teachers tend to quit in June or July. And if other school districts, such as Northeast ISD, also has a really big enrollment decline this year, fewer teachers might actually get the opportunity to leave for that district. But that is, doing that with teachers and administrators is a way to kind of solve the problem in the short term. And SAISD wants to keep going with its strategy of improving academics and opening, innovative schools, and maybe even increasing seats at the innovative schools that it has, because they see this problem as, kind of reaffirmation that they need to double down on that strategy to actually grow enrollment and to attract families and to keep the families that they have within their district.
And then finally, Alia, as we've mentioned, trying to make the best of this not so great situation, and hopefully, things will change in the next few years. But if they don't, and if less and less students enroll at the different schools of SAISD, what does that mean?
Well, it means that the district would basically have to downsize it might mean closing schools, a lot fewer employees. As we're seeing in some of the smaller districts in Bexar County, South San ISD just closed, I think, 4 schools, and they're a smaller district, so they lost fewer students, but they lost more students proportional to their overall enrollment. SAISD might find itself in a situation like that. It would also just kind of be, a depressing end to the superintendent's turnaround plan, because it would kind of be the opposite of what everyone is trying to achieve. I'm not sure if we know enough to kind of predict that will happen. I think we're still not really sure whether this large decline is going to repeat itself over and over again. And especially since we're not really sure of the reasons for it. And once the reasons become clearer, which I hope they will soon, we might be able to kind of look a little more into the future.
I've been speaking with San Antonio Express News staff writer Alia Malik about her story called Largest Ever Enrollment Decline Driving SAISD Budget Shortfall, that you can check out for more details on this topic right now at expressnews.com. Alia, great to have you here on the program for the first time, and maybe we'll talk about this again further down the road, hopefully when there's some better news for SAISD.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks again to San Antonio Express News staff writer Alia Malik for joining me for today's episode of In-Depth, brought to you by the San Antonio Express News. For expressnews.com, I'm Chance Dorland.